Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
July 16th, 1969. Cape Kennedy, Florida. A Saturn V rocket on the launch pad. Millions of people watching, millions more glued to televisions and radios across the world. The countdown reaches 0, the engines ignite, fire roars, the rocket rises. Slowly at first, then faster until it's gone, disappeared into the Florida sky. Apollo 11 is on its way to the moon. It feels like the culmination of years of work, years of steady progress, years of preparation. In a sense, it is. NASA has been working toward this moment since Kennedy made his famous speech in 1961. More than 8 years of planning, of development, of engineering, of training. But here's what's remarkable. Less than 9 months earlier, NASA had never flown the Apollo spacecraft with a crew. 9 months. Think about that. In the time it takes to finish a school year, NASA went from never having flown an Apollo with astronauts aboard to landing human beings on the moon. No crewed Apollo had ever flown. No one had tested the lunar module in space. No one had orbited the moon. No one had practiced docking maneuvers in lunar orbit. No Saturn V carrying humans had ever left Earth. In 9 months, in 281 days, NASA would accomplish all of that. And not as separate leisurely programs, but as a relentless series of test flights. Each more ambitious than the last, each building directly on the successes and lessons of the previous mission. I'm Keith Conrad, and this is Sidequests. On this Sidequest, we're looking at Apollo 11, but not the landing itself. Everyone knows about that. Instead, let's look at something even more remarkable. The 9 months of pure acceleration that made the landing possible. 5 test flights, 281 days, a pace so breathtaking that if any single mission had failed, the entire program might have collapsed. To understand the compressed timeline of Apollo, you have to understand the pressure. Kennedy's deadline. In May 1961, President John F. Kennedy stands before Congress and commits the United States to a goal.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
It's an audacious goal, visionary, but also specific, before 1970. That's the deadline. For several years, the program moves forward. Engineers design the spacecraft, build the rockets, train the astronauts, test systems, but progress isn't automatic. There are problems, technical challenges, setbacks. The program falls behind schedule. Then on January 27th, 1967, tragedy strikes. Apollo 1, a test on the launch pad. Astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee are inside the command module. Testing procedures, nothing launching, then fire. A flash fire in the pure oxygen atmosphere inside the capsule. The crew can't escape, the hatch is sealed, they're killed almost instantly. 3 dead. The entire Apollo program stops. A complete redesign of the command module. Investigations, recertifications, everything has to be rebuilt. By 1968, NASA is significantly behind schedule. The deadline hasn't moved. Kennedy's 1969 goal is still the target, but nearly 2 years of development have been lost to the Apollo 1 tragedy and its aftermath. Time is running out. The end of the decade is approaching. And if NASA is going to meet the deadline, if Americans are going to land on the moon before 1970, every remaining mission has to succeed. There's no room for failure, no room for long delays, no room for extended development of individual systems. NASA is going to have to compress everything, test everything, move at a pace that seems almost impossible. October 11th, 1968, Apollo 7 launches, the first crewed Apollo mission since the Apollo 1 tragedy, the first test of the completely redesigned command module. The crew, Wally Schirra, Don Isley, and Walter Cunningham. 3 astronauts aboard a spacecraft that has never been flown with humans. The stakes are enormous. If this fails, if the redesigned command module has problems, the entire program is in jeopardy. For 11 days, they fly the spacecraft in Earth orbit, test the life support systems, verify that every system works as designed, confirm that the spacecraft is safe. It's not glamorous, it's not going anywhere exotic. Just at Earth orbit, but it's absolutely critical, because NASA can't go to the moon until they know the spacecraft itself is safe. November 1968 arrives. Apollo 7 returns successfully. Every system works, the astronauts are safe. NASA has confidence in the spacecraft for the first time since Apollo 1. Time elapsed since the last crewed Apollo flight. Nearly 22 months. Time since Apollo 7 launched until the moon landing, 8 months and 9 days. December 1968, Apollo 8 is being prepared to fly. The plan: test the lunar module in Earth orbit, get experience with the spacecraft that will eventually land on the moon. But there's a problem. The lunar module isn't ready. It's not flight ready. It's not been tested in space. It needs more development. NASA has a choice. Wait for the lunar module to be ready, delay the mission, risk missing Kennedy's deadline, or change the mission entirely, skip the lunar module test, send Apollo 8 to the moon instead. The decision is made. Apollo 8 will become the first crewed spacecraft to leave Earth orbit. The first crewed spacecraft to orbit another world. The crew: Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and William Anders. December 21st, they launch. 3 days later, they're in lunar orbit. Circling the moon. The first humans to ever see the moon up close. The first humans to see an Earthrise. The incredible sight of Earth rising over the lunar horizon. On Christmas Eve, they broadcast back to Earth. The most watched television broadcast in history.
It's now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light."
Billions of people watching 3 astronauts orbit the moon, reading from Genesis, showing the world the view from lunar orbit. It's extraordinary, it's visionary. It's also incredibly risky. They've never flown this spacecraft on a long-distance mission, never tested long-duration life support, never practiced the navigation required to reach the moon and return. But it works. They orbit the moon, they navigate successfully, they return home safely. 3 months between Apollo 7 and Apollo 8. And in those 3 months, NASA went from testing a spacecraft in Earth orbit to being the first nation to send humans to another world. March 1969, Apollo 9 launches. Now the lunar module is ready, but they're not going to the moon yet. First, they need to test it. The crew: Jim McDivitt, Dave Scott, and Rusty Schweickart. They fly the lunar module in Earth orbit, test the docking mechanism, separate the 2 spacecraft, practice the procedures that will eventually be used to land on the moon. They test the lunar module's engines, test the life support systems, make sure everything works. It's the final piece of the puzzle before attempting an actual lunar landing, and it's critical, because if the lunar module doesn't work in space, the entire program fails. For 10 days, they test. Every system performs as designed. The lunar module is space-worthy. By April 1969, NASA knows everything works. All the pieces are in place. The spacecraft is ready. The procedures are tested. The astronauts are trained. The only thing left is to actually land on the moon. May 1969, Apollo 10 launches. Now it's time to do everything except the actual landing. The crew: Tom Stafford, John Young, and Gene Cernan. They fly to lunar orbit. They undock the lunar module. They fly it down toward the moon's surface. They descend to within about 9 miles of the landing site. They practice all the procedures, test all the systems, see the landing site with their own eyes, but by design, they don't land. They don't carry enough fuel to attempt an actual landing. That's intentional. They're testing everything except the final step. Gene Cernan, piloting the lunar module, later says it's like the best training flight possible. They can see the landing site, practice the procedures, know what to expect, but there's no risk of actually landing, no risk of getting stuck on the moon. It's the ultimate dress rehearsal. Apollo 10 succeeds, they practice everything, they return safely. Let's take a step back and look at what has happened in 9 months. October 1968, Apollo 7 launches. First crewed Apollo spacecraft, first test of their redesigned command module. December 1968, Apollo 8 launches. First crewed spacecraft to leave Earth orbit. First humans to orbit the moon. March 1969, Apollo 9 launches. First crewed test of the lunar module in space. May 1969, Apollo 10 launches. Full lunar landing rehearsal. Everything except the actual landing. July 1969, Apollo 11 launches. The actual moon landing. 5 missions, 5 test flights, 281 days. Each mission accomplished something that no human had ever done before. Each mission was essential preparation for the next. Each mission built directly on the successes of the previous one. Think about that pace. Think about what it means. Imagine a modern space program. Between crewed missions, there are typically long gaps, months, years sometimes, time to analyze data, study results, make sure everything is perfect before flying again. NASA was flying major crewed missions roughly every 2 to 3 months. There was almost no margin for error. There was almost no time for delay. There was almost no flexibility. If Apollo 7 had failed, the entire program would have been set back months, possibly years. If Apollo 8 had serious problems, Apollo 9 would have been postponed. If the lunar module test in Apollo 9 had revealed major flaws, the entire schedule would have shifted. But every single mission succeeded. Not without challenges, there were always challenges, but succeeded, and by July 1969, 9 months after the first crewed Apollo flight, NASA was ready to attempt something that had seemed impossible just a decade earlier. July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 launches. It's presented as a monumental achievement, the culmination of years of work, which it is, but it's also something else. It's the final exam after 9 months of extraordinary acceleration. By the time Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin are descending toward the lunar surface, NASA has done all the preparation, tested everything, practiced the procedures. They're not discovering new things during Apollo 11. They're executing plans that have been tested and refined over 9 months of continuous missions. When Armstrong manually flies the lunar module past the computer's selected landing site, because that site has boulders, he's applying skills that have been developed through months of practice and training. When Buzz Aldrin guides the final descent, he's reading out instruments and procedures that have been tested in Apollo 10. When they touch down with less than a minute of fuel remaining, it's the culmination of 9 months of preparation compressed into the final moments. What makes this timeline truly remarkable is that it's essentially unrepeatable. NASA couldn't do this again, couldn't match this pace. It was possible only under specific circumstances. The pressure of Kennedy's deadline, the urgency of the Cold War space race, the absolute commitment of national resources, the brilliance of the engineers and astronauts, all of it combined to create a moment in history when the space program moved at a pace that seems almost supernatural by modern standards. 5 crewed missions in 9 months, each more ambitious than the last, each building toward a single goal. It wasn't sustainable, it couldn't be maintained. After Apollo 11, the program eventually slowed. Additional lunar missions followed. But the frenetic pace of 1968 to 1969 was unique. Modern human spaceflight is more cautious. There are longer gaps between missions, more analysis, more safety protocols, which arguably is good. Rushing creates risks, and Apollo was risky, extraordinarily risky. But that risk also enabled unprecedented speed, unprecedented achievement. When we think about the Apollo program, we tend to collapse it into a single event. The moon landing, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin. The photograph of the lunar surface, Apollo 11, becomes the entire program in popular memory. But for the people living through it, for the engineers at NASA, for the astronauts, for the flight controllers, it was 9 months of continuous, relentless progress. 9 months of doing things that had never been done before. 9 months of trust. Trust that the engineers' designs would work. Trust that the astronauts' training would be sufficient. Trust that each mission's success would enable the next one. 9 months where the margin for error was essentially zero, where any major failure would have been catastrophic, and yet every mission succeeded. July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 lifts off. To observers at the time, it seemed like the culmination of years of progress. Steady, deliberate progress toward a distant goal. But the reality was different. The reality was acceleration. Compression. 9 months of increasingly ambitious test flights, each building on the last. Less than 9 months earlier, NASA had never flown an Apollo with a crew. Less than 7 months earlier, no human had orbited the moon. Less than 2 months earlier, a lunar module had never been flown by astronauts. In that short span, 281 days, NASA went from basic spacecraft testing to preparing to land on the moon. Modern space programs value caution, value careful deliberation, value time between missions to analyze and verify and prepare. Maybe that's wise, maybe rushing creates unnecessary risk. But in 1968 and 1969, NASA chose acceleration over caution, chose urgency over deliberation, chose to compress what might have taken years into 9 months, and they did it. They reached the moon. They landed on the moon. They proved that humans could go there. It's possible that it could never be done again at that pace. With current protocols and modern understanding of risk, the timeline would be stretched, extended, safer perhaps, but slower. But for those 9 months in 1968 to 1969, anything seemed possible. And maybe that's the real story of Apollo 11, not that we landed on the moon, but that we decided to do it quickly, and then we actually did.